Okay, I've got the Ironqloud.py script working, and I thought I'd do a quick screen capture just to show you how it works fully complete. So what I've got two terminal windows open here, both open to the same host. This is actually the Docker host up on EC2. And in this terminal window, I'm going to run the Ironqloud script, and in this terminal here, I'm going to run a shell script called regtest.shell that I wrote, which simulates a Docker push to the registry. And the reason I'm doing that is because in order to test the script, you have to push something to the registry to create a notification. And the registry was becoming very bloated with, literally hundreds of Docker images. And so what I did, instead of actually pushing to the real registry, is that I created a little shell script that does a post request to my listener and sends the JSON data from a notification. And that way I don't have to push to the registry every time I want to test this. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to go ahead and run the Ironqloud.py script here, which spawns an HTTP listener to listen for registry notifications. So and you'll see here that the first thing it does is it checks to see if Docker registry is running. It says it's not running, and so it starts it. The reason I do that is because number one, this entire application is a single ecosystem, and so there's really no reason to be running the Ironqloud private Docker registry when the application isn't running. And the other reason that that's important is that the registry is a very chatty application and sends lots of notifications to the endpoint. So I really only want to run my Docker registry when my listener is running, so that I don't accumulate a lot of cached notifications. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and execute this shell script down here to send a put, or rather a post request to my endpoint. And let's see here, shell regsim. Sorry, I spelled that wrong. All right, here we go. So this kind of zooms by fast. I put some wait times in here to slow it down, but you can pause your video and take a look at the details. But you see, the first thing it does is when it sees a push, it parses all the data and sort of presents an opening set of information about the image that had been pushed. Image name, its location, time and date stamp, the SHA digest, and once that's done, it actually does a Docker pull, pulling that image from the registry down to the Docker host, and then it runs that Docker image. So just to be clear, we're running presumably a client image, an image that a developer has built, or a CI build system has built and wants to test. And so if I scroll back up here, what you can see is, here's the top here. The very first thing I do is actually print out, this is the JSON from the push, and you can see here the action was push. Here's the ID of that event. It talks about the request and the host. It's also got down below here, here's the digest, the repository, which repository, this is the actual image name. So in this case, we're pushing an image called BusyBox, and its tag is version 4.2. So that's actually not very typical. More often than not, you'll see that the tag is latest, and so but in this case, I've just tagged it 4.2. So the next thing it does is it actually sets up the tests, and it parses all this information and presents it to you here. Our project name is Tray App. The project name will be used in the future to associate this image with a project, and the project will have a policy file associated with it. and then we'll apply that policy to the image. So in this case, we're just hard coding it, but we're saying let's apply the Docker bench policy to this image. So the next thing we do is we pull the required images for testing. So we're going to pull the BusyBox image from the registry, and we're also going to pull the Docker bench image. And then the next thing that we want to do is actually run those images. So in this case, we're launching the containers, and we're launching the BusyBox container. We're also grabbing the container ID, and the reason this is important is that once the tests are finished executing, we want to do two things. We want to stop this container. We want to execute a docker stop command on that container so that it's no longer running. And we also want to tear it down and clean up the artifacts so that those remnants aren't left sitting on the hard drive. So we do two things. We do a docker stop command, and we do a docker remove command to actually remove that from the system. So it's not removed from the registry, by the way. It's only removed from the Docker host. So next thing we're doing is we're actually running the Docker bench script. So you can see here that this is the beginning of the script. The very first thing we do is test the Ironqloud sandbox environment. And what that refers to is the Docker host. So we're testing the Docker installation on the EC2 instance that we're running, and you can see it produces a lot of information here, and then it tests the Docker daemon, it tests the host configuration, and just for clarity, I have done nothing in particular to sort of remedy any of these issues. I'm just focused on getting this script to run and execute properly, and not necessarily on whether or not these tests are passing or failing. So you can see there's several sections. There's section 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 to this test. Docker daemon configuration files. A lot of this is just informational about setting permissions and directory ownership and so on. And then we're saying that the sandbox tests are complete. And then the next thing that we're going to do is actually test the container images. So we're doing all this in the Ironqloud sandbox, meaning our Docker host. We do a variety of things here, and again, this is all part of the Docker bench test. And right here, we're actually testing the running container. Interesting to note is that Docker bench will test all running images, or rather containers, on the Docker host. So if you have 10 containers running currently on the Docker host, it's going to test all 10 of them. So in this case, we're actually testing 2 containers because there are 2 containers now running, and Docker bench excludes itself from the test. But right now we have the IQ registry container running, so it includes that in the test. We can certainly exclude that at some point. But it's also scanning the other running container, which is the BusyBox container. Sorry. So here we go. It completes the test, and then the last thing it does is it stops the container. So again, here's that ID. And then it removes the terminated container, and then the tests are complete, and now you'll notice that it's waiting for the next event. So the HTTP listener, the endpoint, is still sitting here waiting. So if I execute this shell script again to do another post, it will run the tests again. So this could presumably be for a different image that had been pushed, or it could be a repeat test for the same image, maybe after you've modified it. So that's it. Let me go ahead and shut this down and show you some of the code. I already have this open. Oh, here we go. What's going on here? I've organized this a little bit better. We've got the stop registry function that is called every time you command or control C the script, so that it will gracefully stop Docker registry as a part of that process. Here's the start registry function that executes when you launch the script. It checks to see if the Docker registry is running, starts it if not. And then here's our main test routine here. It's called test setup, but it really should be more appropriately named main or test execution or something of that nature. But this is the sort of the main routine where all the various functions get called. So in this case right here, I'm actually calling the Docker pull. We call the Docker run routine right here. And then we call the Docker bench routine, which executes the Docker bench tests. And I don't need to pass an image name to that because, number one, it's not capable of only testing a single image. It tests all the running containers, so I don't need to pass a container ID or anything like that to it. And then lastly, I run the Docker kill routine or function that takes a container ID and stops and executes that. So, and then you can see all the different functions here. So that's it. Thought I'd show you the progress, and going pretty well so far.